I have a question about. I'm also a good user of electronic money. So my question, you're introducing the electronic euro, as I know.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
How can switching to an electronic currency help?
Well, two things. Number one, it will be decided in October. So we are preparing the ground. We want to be ready. We want to be trained, but it will not be decided until October 23.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I'm personally convinced that we have to move ahead is a situation like the one we are in now. We are dependent on the supply of gas by a very unfriendly country. I don't want Europe to be dependent on an unfriendly country's currency. For instance, I don't know, the Chinese currency, the Russian currency, the whatever. Or dependent on a friendly currency, but which is activated by a private corporate entity like Facebook or like Google or anybody like that.
I'm user of Bitcoin too, so I had bought it when it started, and I hope that it also will work through the special system. And I know there are many protests in Europe against the electronic euro. What is the reason?
It's the beauty of Europe. It has different positions. If you ask in Northern Europe, for instance, in the Netherlands, they're quite happy to see the e-euro coming. If you ask a young German man, he'll say, yeah, fine. As I said, I don't want Meta, Google, or Amazon to suddenly come up with a currency that would take over the sovereignty of Europe. I don't want a foreign currency to become the currency of trading within Europe. So we have to be ready.
No, the problem is they don't want to be controlled. They don't want to.
Yeah, but you know what? Now we have in Europe this threshold. Above 1,000 euros, you cannot pay cash. If you do, you are on the gray market. So you take your risk. You get caught, you are fined, or you go in jail. But the digital euro is going to have a limited amount of control. There will be control. You're right. You're completely right. We are considering whether for very small amounts, anything that is around 300, 400 euros, we could have a mechanism where there is zero control. But that could be dangerous. The terrorist attacks on France back 10 years ago were entirely financed by those very small anonymous credit cards that you can recharge in total anonymity.
Welcome to The Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on The Independent Review.
Welcome to the Independent Review. Today we have clips from Derrick Broze, Robert Inlakesh, Kim Iversen with an interview with Ryan Cristián, and we will start off with this week's New World Next Week with James Corbett and James Evan Pilato.
Welcome back to New World Next Week. I'm James Corbett of CorbettReport.com.
And I'm James Evan Pilato from MediaMonarchy.com. In secret meetings, you plan and conspire to create a new order of which you aspire. We've got that poem, plus the Green Reaper threatens eminent domain. But first, White House says don't report on the Pentagon leaks. Grabbing this, of course, from the fine folks at antiwar.com. The White House on Monday warned media outlets against publishing information contained in the top secret documents leaked from the Pentagon and other U.S. agencies that have surfaced on the internet. Without confirming the validity of the documents, this is information that has no business in the public domain. White House National Security Council spokesman John Kirby told reporters, "It has no business, if you don't mind me saying, on the front pages of newspapers or on television. It is not intended for public consumption, and it should not be out there," he added. The documents first surfaced on Discord, a messaging platform used by gamers and, of course, your members-only Media Monarchy community. And most appear to be authentic as the Biden administration is scrambling to control the leak. Kirby admitted that the administration has no idea if more leaks are coming. And then the next day, on Tuesday, Secretary of Defense and former Raytheon board member who awarded Raytheon $2.36 billion in government contracts in his first 3 months with Brandon. I don't know how much he's done in the 2 years since then. Secretary of Defense and former Raytheon board member Lloyd Austin vowed to turn over every rock to find the source of the leaks. Now, I can't say much more while the Justice Department investigation is ongoing, but we take this very seriously, he said. Some of the leaks show the U.S.'s war plans for Ukraine and expose that Washington believes that Kiev is running out of air defenses and won't be able to gain much ground in an expected spring counteroffensive. The leaks also expose the U.S. spying on its allies, including Ukraine, Israel, reciprocally, of course, South Korea, and Hungary. This is a very serious national security matter, and it was discussed at the White House press room moments after the Easter Bunny was there, James. Can you feel how serious this is? It feels sometimes, like a lot of times, we're ruled by children, James.
Clown world, what else can you say? But I don't know, was that a follow the white rabbit reference? And maybe QAnon is real and he's working for Biden now and blah, blah, whatever. Anyway, back in reality, the real question I think with this story is, what is the real narrative here? Because, okay, yeah, the government comes out and says, hey guys, oh no, this leak, don't talk about the leak. And now it's all over everywhere. And the most reporting I've seen on it in the MSM is in, like, the BBC. So, like, I don't know, how seriously should we take this and blah, blah, blah. And what is it really revealed? Well, to be fair, I think there are already some geopolitical ramifications to some of the tidbits in here. One example of that from antiwar.com, leaks showing U.S. spied on South Korea spark outrage in Seoul. Which, again, even narratively, is this really new news? We could go back to 2013. U.S. spy agency bugged UN headquarters, according to Germany's Spiegel. And 2021, U.S. spied on Merkel and other Europeans through Danish cables. So, you know, oh my God, the U.S. is spying on its allies. Wow, shocking news. Of course, it isn't news to anyone in the world, diplomatically speaking. But having said that, once it comes out, and it's out in the public domain, and it starts being reported on, obviously, at the very least, to save face, Seoul has to go, oh my God, you know, who could have guessed the U.S. would be doing this? And it becomes a geopolitical thing. So, presumably, they wouldn't want that out in the open. Neither the U.S. nor South Korea would want that to be released. So I guess there may be some reality to it in that sense. But then there are the other stories, like leaked document says Ukraine could run out of air defense missiles by early May, saying that, oh my God, they're running out of this ammo for these Russian air defense systems that they have. And by May, Russia will be able to take them over because of their superior air power, which, what's the narrative here? Oh, they need more support. So more ka-ching, more dollars, more weapons to Ukraine, right? So there's a lot of different narrative strategies going on here. But I think the important part of this is not necessarily what is contained in the leaks themselves so much as what the meta-narrative of the leaks will be. And, of course, what does this bring up the specter of? The Russian hacking boogeyman that we've been talking about for years now, and they're behind every corner, and we have to restructure the internet, and you're going to have to fingerprint and eye scan to get on the internet, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's an interesting sort of kink in that narrative. The Ron Paul Institute, which is not known for being, anti-Russian or, Russia boogeyman scare, in fact, being quite the opposite, has just published an op-ed by Thomas Lipscomb, why Putin may have exposed the U.S. NATO Ukraine operations documents, which is speculating, and it's total speculation, but speculating that, maybe Putin wants to justify the Ukraine operation, special military operation, don't call it a war, by saying, oh, look at these US NATO documents talking about these things, rather than, it's not coming from me, it's coming from them. And to be fair, there are certain things in here that do point in that direction. Leaked documents appear to show NATO special operations forces are in Ukraine, as well as French and UK and other specific cadres. So that is something that, again, shouldn't be surprising, but that the fact that it is coming out and is apparently, if not confirmed, at least being suggested by these documents, again, is not something that they would want out in the open. Also, leak shows Ukrainian SBU agents, that's the Ukrainian Special Service, agents attacked Russian surveillance plane in Belarus, which was originally blamed on Belarusian partisans, but apparently it was Ukrainian Special Forces. Again, something that Putin would at least be able to point to and say, see, they're doing these types of operations in third-party countries, So there's some aspect to that. But really, the narrative on top of all of this is going to be, oh my God, these leaked documents going out on this Discord platform, oh my God, how are we going to crack down on this and make sure it never happens again? That's the reaction. Again, no matter what the actual story here is and who got leaked what by when and whether it's all real or all fake or some combination thereof, the reaction to this is going to be the real story. And I'm not holding my breath waiting for, oh, okay, guys, whatever. It's free speech on the internet. Let's go on. Obviously, there's going to be some serious ramifications for this in terms of national security. And that's the way they're going to ultimately crack down on the internet, is in the name of national security. And it just takes these types of incidents to gin up at least the idea in the public that this is going to be necessary to start getting some sort of internet ID going. And don't worry, Elon Musk and the other free speech saviors will be there to institute the ID scanning for Twitter and every other social media platform.
This could help soften up Discord for sale to Microsoft, and they have been very interested in years past, but have kind of walked away from it. James, it seems to me like maybe it's the Occam's razor. Most likely, isn't it probably some military guy who's a giant video game fan, of which many, 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 many of them are, got some documents and put them on the platforms that they use as gamers. This also reminds me in some ways, James, maybe of the Panama Papers. I've been playing, of course, I play classic Monarchy episodes, and the longer I've been doing this, the more interesting it is to play episodes from, say, this day in 2016 and see how illuminating it is. But it wasn't so long ago I was playing episodes and they were talking about the Panama Papers, where again it's a commercial for national security agendas. These big leaks. Again, it might fit into another way that conspiracy culture, as I said for many years, conspiracy culture was eaten by mainstream culture, and they're selling it back to everybody because it's super popular box office. So the exciting stories of leaks, I think. Again, they realize how these elements can be used and have been using them. It did finally just dawn on me there, James, the extra irony of the Justice Department investigating this, and we learn, we're spying on friendly nations. The Justice Department, of course, I never miss an opportunity to mention Danny Casolara's Octopus, the Justice Department that stole the Promise software and installed a backdoor and sold it to friendly nations so that they could spy on them. That's even sort of the publicly accepted version of that story. We will include related links over, this might be even a little more recent, James, over 100 more classified docs appear online. U.S. secrets from Ukraine to Middle East to China. We'll include that link to Zero Hedge as we conclude that first segment here on New World Next Week, episode 516. Our second story, rather infuriating, James, as the J.P. Morgan chief says, seize property to build wind and solar farms. The chief executive of J.P. Morgan has suggested the government should seize private land to build wind and solar farms in order to meet net zero targets. The hated Jamie Dimon, the long-standing boss of Wall Street Titan, who donates to the Democratic Party, said green energy projects must be fast-tracked as the window for averting the most costly impacts of global climate change is closing. In his annual shareholder letter, Mr. Diamond said, quote, permitting reforms are desperately needed to allow investment to be done in any kind of timely way. We may even need to evoke eminent domain. We simply are not getting the adequate investments fast enough for grid, solar, wind, and pipeline initiatives. Eminent domain is when a government or state agency carries out a compulsory purchase of private property for public use and compensates the asset holder. The proposal's unusual, especially coming from the longest-serving chief executive of a Wall Street bank, and could stir controversy as states in America seek to crack down on seizure orders. In Iowa, state legislators this week passed a bill that aims to protect private property owners from eminent domain use by carbon pipeline companies. Mr. Diamond said, of course, we haven't mentioned it in a couple seconds, the war in Ukraine was redefining the way countries and companies, of which, of course, there is no difference, the way they're going to plan for energy security. Mr. Diamond's comments also come as tensions between investors grow about how to tackle climate change. The banking chief also hit out against regulators in the wake of the whole Silicon Valley Bank collapse. He said that collapse and the government-engineered takeover of their biggest rival, Credit Suisse, risked undermining confidence in the sector. James, my confidence in them is just totally blown now. I'm so bummed out. Eminent domain, again, will include the link to Cornell Law. Eminent domain refers to the power of the government to take private property and convert it into public use, referred to as a taking. The pesky Fifth Amendment provides that the government may only exercise this power if they provide just compensation to the property owners. Just compensation. Like a donut for taking their clot shot. In other news, James, Oxford scientists said wind power fails on every count, and redacted emails in the massive ongoing lawsuit against J.P. Morgan revealed J.P. Morgan executives joked about Epstein's pedophilia. Pedo-banksters threatened to take your stuff, James. That's the alternate headline.
Yeah, that's the more accurate headline, isn't it? I'm glad you brought that story up, because that was exactly the one I was going to point to that's going through the news wires right now. Yeah, ha. Oh, that pedophile Epstein that we're dealing with. Ha ha. And just to follow up specifically on Jamie Dimon himself, I did mention it before, but the latest I've seen on this from a couple of weeks ago, Jamie Dimon will face questioning in lawsuits over JP Morgan's Epstein ties. So that's still ongoing, in case you'd forgotten about it during all the other banking shenanigans that are going on recently. Anyway, in a sense, I like how straightforward and out in the open the agenda is in this story, because eminent domain, and what is that? It's out. There's no hiding. There's no flowery language. Well, there is. Eminent domain is flowery language. But what is this? It's the government presuming, it literally says, we own this entire geographical area, including whatever land you own. Nope. If we come along and declare public use, we get to take it. Don't worry. We'll give you what we think is a good, just value in return for it. But it's ours. We own this land. So that is essentially, for anyone who wasn't paying attention, that is what governments truly believe. And then secondarily, so what is this whole green agenda about? It is about monopolizing the resources of the planet Earth. We own the planet Earth. We allow you peasants to live on it and graze on it and maybe, make some things from it, but we will collect our taxes. And when we want, we will take that from you for what we want. And wind farm, whatever, who cares, whatever. The point is we own it. And that's what the sustainable development agenda is about at base. It is a monopolization of the planet's resources for the exclusive use and enjoyment of the pedophile banksters and other people who presume to rule over you. That's what this is about. So I'll throw in a link to my What is Sustainable Development podcast, where I lay that out in excruciating detail, and the debt for nature swaps and all of these other things that they come up with. But this is the base level of the scam. They own the planet Earth. They allow you to occupy a piece of it for as long as they feel that will be productive towards their ends. And when it is no longer productive towards their ends, they'll come and take it away from you.
You might remember the story from, that's right, last week. GMOs for thee, but not for me. The Green King and all of these things. It's just the eugenics agenda seems to be a real major part of this whole, what do they call it, New World Order thing. As we will wrap up this New World Next Week episode 516 with one actually from a couple of weeks ago, but it is still definitely worth going over, as you just mentioned, James, how sort of plain it is, how much the mask has slipped, which I kind of laugh at as that's appropriate since, of course, the COVID emergency show is now all over. This is not my hyperbole or my incessant editorializing. This is Nikkei Asia's headline. Trilateral Commission calls 2023 year one of New World Order. Dateline, New Delhi, as retired foreign ministers, ambassadors, CEOs, bankers, and academics gathered at the secretive Trilateral Commission's first global plenary meeting in India, perhaps the most influential individual sat quietly off to the side, listening. James Baker, director of the Pentagon's Office of Net Assessment, was not even on the list of participants at the Taj Palace Hotel in New Delhi. But his takeaways from the meeting could find their way into policies that shape the world. James, I fully assume that this guy, James H. Baker, gotta be related to longtime Bush crime family consigliere James A. Baker III, but I could not, in my show prep, I could not confirm that. Maybe some folks could help us out there. One particular speech may have caught Baker's attention, for it captured the essence of the three-day discussion. The Biden administration is trying to convince the world that this is this titanic struggle between autocracies and democracies. I'm skeptical about that, a speaker said. Instead, the world is fragmented, with countries, including the U.S., looking out for their self-interest, the speaker added. The Trilateral Commission is a non-governmental organization that seeks to deepen understanding between the U.S., Europe, and Asia. Back in the mid-'70s, they chose one of their members, Jimmy Carter, as surprise shock winner of America's next top president. They needed him to create Al-Qaeda with Brzezinski. The speaker, James, who cannot be identified according to commission rules, which might sound a lot like some of these other societies with secrets where all the biggest so-called elites sneak away to decide our future in secret behind closed doors. The speaker cannot be identified according to commission rules went on, quote, 3 decades of globalization defined as integrated, free market-based and deflationary has been replaced by what will be a multi-decade period of globalization defined as fragmented, not free market-based, but industrial policy-based and structurally inflationary. This year, 2023, is year one of this new global order. The Trilateral Commission held its annual plenary meeting in India for the first time, signaling the secretive organization's interest in the world's most populous country, of course. Created by David Rockefeller 50 years ago, in 1973, the Commission sought to bring the rising economy of Japan firmly into the West. Today, of course, like a NATO or something, it's expanded to include members from South Korea, India, Southeast Asia. Another hot topic, this is interesting, this is where it gets really good, James, of course, was artificial intelligence. A poll last year found that 49% of AI researchers have said that AI poses an existential threat to humanity, almost to the level of a nuclear type of disaster in the scale of humanity, said a member. Many in the room called for a global scheme to govern AI. Still, participants were generally positive about the wildly popular ChatGPT and later jokingly asked the bot to write a poem about the Trilateral Commission. Following is one example, which means there might have been other amazing poems that we haven't gotten reported on yet. In secret meetings, you plan and conspire to create a new order of which you aspire. Your goals are unclear, but some see the end as a world government with you as its friend. James.
Ha ha ha, that wacky AI. What'll it come up with next?
What'll it do next?
Whew. Okay, well, that to the side for the moment. Yeah, okay, well, for people who don't have their heads screwed on straight or can't see the trees for the forest, what is this about? What are the what specifically this particular quote from the Trilateral Commission meeting, which you will note, because of the rules of the meeting, they can't say who it was, but someone participating in this meeting said this about the globalization. And it's that quote that you read: 3 decades of globalization defined as integrated, free market-based, and deflationary has been replaced by what will be a multi-decade period of globalization defined as fragmented, not free market-based, but industrial policy-based, and structurally inflationary. What is he describing there? It's the multipolar world order that, oh, it's the BRICS, man, and it's this new form of globalization that's totally not globalization, guys. Except it is. And that is what this is about. It's the One Belt, One Road approach to globalization, essentially. It's structurally inflationary. It's not free market-based. It is industrial policy-based. And yeah, it's going to be fragmented. It'll look like this over here on the BRICS side. It'll look like this over here on the NATO side. But whatever, guys. It is the New World Order. That is what they are describing. So keep that in mind for people who continue to insist that the BRICS multipolar world is going to be the savior of humanity. No, it is the next stage of globalization, and it's year 1 of the New World Order, according to the Trilateral Commission, founded by David Rockefeller, as they noted in the article. But you edited out the best part. Founded by philanthropist David Rockefeller, as he's described in this article, which I could think of a lot of different ways to describe David Rockefeller. Philanthropist would not be the one that springs to mind. But anyway, yeah, for people who don't know about the Trilateral Commission or its relevance, obviously Patrick Wood has had a lot to say about that over the years and how Trilateral Commission is fed directly into technocracy. And they have been steering and puppeteering the New World Order agenda for many decades now, and they're announcing year 1 of New World Order. I mean, take it as seriously as you want from any pronouncement from these globalist swine, but at any rate, they're out there talking about it. This is the New World Order. It is this multipolar world order that people are talking about.
And they give things new names. James, in prepping the show, I was trying to find some joke, because of course this secret meeting was taking place in New Delhi. I was trying to find some joke between New Delhi, Old Delhi. It's all still the same old world order, New World Order. It's still the same plan. They just change the marketing from time to time. Again, they're smart. They adjust their marketing like any, corporate campaign would do.
Like Bud Light.
Exactly. Aye. Or, of course, like those shameless shills at newworldnextweek.com. All sizes of Corbett Report shirts are now actually back in stock. We just got those in a couple of days ago. New Monarchy baseball caps for 2023, I believe, have shipped, that are on their way to the headquarters. And yes, we can confirm that also the new Corbett Report 2011 USB archives are in. Those will be added to the store very shortly. So that, again, is just some of the ways you can support us at newworldnextweek.com. Of course, we've got the post office box. We've got all the other different platforms, and some of them work well, and some of them are pain in the butt sometimes. James, for folks that use, and I know you are not on there, but I'm on Subscribestar, and I know there are lots of other alt media folks that are on there. If you use the very wonky Subscribestar, do an alt media creator a favor. Me or any of the folks you might support on there, alt media or whatever, go double check that your pledge is actually still working. For whatever reason, a bunch of things broke the other day. They just, finally sort of let us know about it. And we've gotten confirmation from a few different people who are like, yeah, they just canceled my pledge. My bank account is fine and flush. There's no reason I should have been stopped. So I know we're trying to get an answer out of them. We haven't really gotten anything yet. But just do us a favor, go check it out and double check and be like, yeah, your thing still works, or maybe it's not. And maybe if it's not, you can head to MediaMonarchy.com/join and support fear-free, ad-free news, music, memes, and more that's been doing it. James, I put MediaMonarchy.blogspot.com up on September 11th, 2005. And since then, I've basically turned that old blog into what I basically call a radio station. I run it Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 Mountain Time, and would love for folks to come check it out, MediaMonarchy.com. James, that is episode 516 of New World Next Week.
But before we go, James, earlier you raised the specter of Danny Casolaro and the Octopus. How can people find out more about that?
Thank you for giving me that extra opportunity. We made a radio play a couple years ago now called John Klein's Octopus. It was from a theatrical production that actually myself and my wife and even Alexa friend were familiar with from our university decades ago. We did a new original radio play. I like to call it New Time Radio. And that is available up at newworldnextweek.com. It's 5 episodes. It stars an all West Virginia cast, because of course the story of Danny Castellaro reached its denouement in a hotel room in West Virginia. It's 5 episodes. It is a digital download, so if you buy that at newworldnextweek.com, you immediately get the link to download it. And it is, if I remember correctly, James, it is several gigs, because it also contains pretty much every bit of research I've done on the octopus and every bit of research you've done on the octopus as well. There are PDF files, audio, video. There's a bunch of stuff in there beyond just the simple, hopefully entertaining and edutaining radio play, the octopus, that you can find there. James, thanks for that.
Awesome. All right, let's do it again. Talk to you again next week.
All right, buddy. Take care.
Next, let's go to this clip from Robert Inlakesh with 8 points on the recent mosque attack.
So today we're going to be looking at Israel's 8 points as to why they are justified in attacking Palestinian worshippers inside of the third holiest site for Muslims, the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and why it was all the Palestinians' fault, and also why, apparently, according to Benjamin Netanyahu in the tweet he put out, he stated that this is the truth that you will not see in the mainstream media, which is interesting because most of the Western mainstream press presented what happened as clashes and took a pretty pro-Israeli line. But let's look at this video and see what these magical 8 points are and if Israel has any legitimacy. Well, this first point is interesting, actually. They say Israel grants full access to Muslim worshippers into Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is just flatly incorrect. Now, during the holy month of Ramadan for Muslims, they have prevented many different groups of worshippers from entering Al-Aqsa Mosque, whether that just be individual cases where the Israeli guards, which are stationed there at every single gate of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, are refusing individual people. During the month, actually, an unarmed Palestinian from Naqab, or the Negev area, was shot dead whilst trying to defend a woman who was being attacked by Israeli forces, reportedly. And all of the videotapes of this incident mysteriously went missing, although the area where this happened has CCTV everywhere. And it just suddenly went missing, and the Israeli police don't know where it went. But in general, Palestinians from West Bank, for instance, or the Gaza Strip, are not allowed to enter Al-Aqsa Mosque at all. And this is even for Palestinians in the West Bank who, in a 15-minute walk, could get to the old city, but are behind a wall and are prevented from entering occupied East Jerusalem altogether. And this is a key part because Jerusalem is an occupied city under international law. Israel annexed it, but the international community flatly rejected this annexation. Israel should be obligated to allow all Muslim worshippers to go into the site when they please, because the site is not actually under the jurisdiction of Israel. The Al-Aqsa Mosque compound is actually under the custodianship of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, next door. So the Jordanians actually have what's known as the Waqf, who control guards inside of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound itself and are supposed to manage the internal security situation inside Al-Aqsa Mosque itself. And if the Israelis want to enter, they are supposed to coordinate with the Jordanian Waqf. But in many cases, they don't do this, and this causes great tension. So the Israelis actually do not have any sovereignty over the area. Not only is it illegally occupied, but the Israelis are supposed to be in an agreement with Jordan so that Jordan has this custodianship over the holy sites inside occupied East Jerusalem. And the second point is interesting, that these riots were planned by Palestinian terrorists in advance. When they say Palestinian terrorists, what they actually mean are There are few young Palestinians. There's normally about 20 or 30 of them. In some cases, about 100 will show up, who decide to station themselves in Al-Aqsa Mosque overnight. The reason why they do this is because they know that Israeli forces will enter in the morning or late at night in order to expel all Muslim worshippers from the compound. So when they're talking about Palestinian terrorists and rioters and all of this, what they're saying is that political parties inside of Palestine, and every single political party in Palestine is considered as a terrorist organization other than the mainstream branch of the Fatah party by the Israelis. So basically any political party, even human rights organizations inside the occupied territories are considered terrorist organizations nowadays by Israel. So when they say Palestinian terrorists, you have to keep in mind what they mean by terrorists. They just mean any Palestinian political party or movement, or just individual Palestinians who decide to take it upon themselves to commit to any given action on any given day. That's normally what they mean by terrorists, and definitely what they mean here. But the fact of the matter is that Palestinians did show up, and they stayed overnight in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. That part is true. But they didn't plan to riot and attack the Israelis. That was not the plan of why they were there. The reason why they're there is because every single day during Ramadan, the Israeli forces have entered the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound to clear Palestinian worshippers out. And during this specific time leading up to the attacks on the worshippers, which happened 3 times within a 24-hour time space and time window, 2 of those times when those Palestinian worshippers who had gathered there overnight had already been arrested, expelled, and beaten down. One man lost his eye, for instance, who was not part of that group of youths who decided to stay inside of Al-Aqsa Mosque overnight. And so the reason why they are there is to stop worshippers entirely from being expelled, and the reason why the Israelis are expelling the worshippers is because the Israeli authorities want to allow for these extremist Temple Mount groups, they call themselves settlers, to enter into Al-Aqsa Mosque and perform provocative acts. Basically, this movement wants to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque compound and build what they call a third temple, right? A synagogue in the place of the mosque. That's what they want there. And so this is an ongoing battle over who is sovereign here. Is this a Muslim holy site? Because it's, a mosque there at the moment. Or will this be taken over under Israeli sovereignty so that the site can be destroyed and a synagogue can be built there? And these settlers, that's what they openly aim to do. And so Israeli forces go in to clear out Muslim worshippers first so that they can then escort these settlers to come in. And the settlers, again, they're not there just to pray and use the site. They're there specifically for a political goal. So, point 3, we carry on from the explanation I just gave to point 2. They're talking about how they barricaded themselves inside the mosque and they had fireworks, right? They carried fireworks. So some young people brought fireworks into Al-Aqsa Mosque compound, and yes, they barricaded themselves inside the Al-Qibli prayer hall, right, as it's known, in the compound. They closed the doors. The Israeli forces burst in, fired stun grenades, right, are in fully militarized uniform, right? This is a militarized force which entered a holy site disrespectfully with the purpose of assaulting and expelling worshippers. And some of the people in there, yes, they gathered there for a confrontation because they knew that the Israeli forces were going to storm the mosque like they've done in previous years and attack people there anyway in order to force them out of the holy site, which they are in so that they can pray and start their fast in the morning, for instance. So they entered in the night. Yes, they had fireworks against bullets, tear gas, stun grenades, and because of this as well, a small fire was lit inside of the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The Israeli forces do not need to go in and do this. There is no need. These are not rioters. And you're not a terrorist because you have a firework to fire back at them to deter them from coming inside the mosque when they're coming specifically to attack you and then take you out and force you out of a holy site so that then a bunch of extremists can come in and parade around your holy site. And there's been past examples of extremist Israeli settlers carrying out terrorist attacks and attempting to destroy the Al-Aqsa Mosque, or at least planning to do it. And the other component to this here is that they say that these rioters and Palestinian terrorists were preparing to attack with sticks and stones. They didn't have sticks, and there were no stones inside of the mosque, by the way. They had plastic chairs to try and prevent Israeli forces from attacking them, smashing their heads in with batons. And they did have fireworks. Fireworks were actually present there. They weren't there to attack non-Muslim visitors. They were there with those fireworks, and they closed the doors to keep the Israeli forces out, which the Israeli forces broke down in order to get in and attack them. They didn't need to do that. They were there, stationed there, for a very simple purpose, to remain in the site. That's what they wanted to do, to remain there overnight. Not to come out and attack non-Muslim visitors. This means the Israeli forces, the Israeli police forces. That's what it means. That's what they mean by non-Muslims. And also then the settlers that come in to provocatively storm. They're the only non-Muslim visitors that are coming in. And visitors is just a misleading way of characterizing this. And then you have the point about they fired at Israeli police forces who were forced to evacuate them, and then they desecrated their own holy site, which just leaves out the part where the Israelis broke into the holy site, broke into the mosque, stormed in. No videos here in this video showing the Israeli forces shooting Palestinian worshippers with rubber-coated steel bullets in the head, assaulting elderly men, assaulting women, smashing people's heads in with batons whilst they're laying on the ground attempting to defend themselves just by putting their hands up. This is just pure propaganda and absolute rubbish. This is a hilarious point because they say that there were no fatalities. There were 400 plus people arrested, injured, or both from this. And there were at least 2 critical injuries. And just days before, like I explained earlier, a Palestinian man was shot dead at Al-Aqsa Mosque. So this whole thing that there was no fatalities, there were 2 critical injuries. Someone lost their eye because of the attacks. They were relentless. The hilarious thing is, as well, that they put up the point, because of the valiant efforts of the Israeli security forces smacking in the heads of women and elderly men who were worshipping at the mosque, because of them, thousands of other Muslims could then safely come to pray, as if these people were somehow a threat to fellow Muslim worshippers coming into the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Which is ridiculous. And, they focus on one aspect, which was the initial Israeli assault, where they actually removed all the people, the young men, who were stationed there and had fireworks, for instance, to fire at the Israeli forces to try and keep them out of the mosque. Unsuccessfully, of course. But then later on, they attacked again. And they actually attacked, and you can see the video for yourself here, a number of Palestinian men, older men, who are praying during prayer. They're praying and they literally come in and push them away and stop them from praying. And these are the images, these are the videos which were spread around, which caused such outrage everywhere. And there were 3 separate attacks that happened within the space of 24 hours, and unnecessarily so. So let's get on to the next point. So the first part of this is just pure propaganda, this 7th point here, where they say Israel is committed to, maintaining the freedom and tolerance of all religions, right, and religious practice. That's just utterly nonsense, and I don't think we need to go through all of the examples of Israel repressing the rights of worship for Palestinian Muslims and for Christians as well. But the last part of that's political. That's a political statement and maintaining the status quo. That last part of the seventh point here has to be addressed, because when they talk about maintaining the status quo, they mean maintaining the political status quo and the status quo on the ground at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And this has massive implications, especially for Israel's relationship with Jordan, because Israel signed a peace treaty with Jordan in 1994. And possibly, if Israel changes this status quo, it could cause great friction with neighboring Jordan. And Israel announces, and Netanyahu announced after the attacks on worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque, that Israel is committed to maintaining the status quo. But they're not. When Itamar Ben-Gvir, the current security minister, stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque in January of this year, and it was such a big issue, Israel made it seem like it was nothing and it was just normal, but of course it was not. It was a provocative political move. A United Nations Security Council meeting was called immediately, and Jordan, again, which has custodianship over the site, said that this is, not respecting the status quo, and that this is a provocative move, and openly condemned it. And it was condemned there by a number of different nation states in the Security Council. And there was this ongoing battle of words between the Jordanians and the Israelis in the Security Council at the time. And the Israeli ambassador there openly said that Israel has sovereignty over this area. This is sovereign Israeli territory. Jerusalem is. All of Jerusalem is Israeli. It's sovereign, right? And their interpretation of the status quo, and they argue for this, is that Jews also should have the right to go there and worship. That's not actually the status quo. The status quo is that this is a Muslim holy site, and that all other faith groups and anyone, even atheists, can enter the site, but there's designated times, so it doesn't coincide with Muslims praying inside of the mosque, for instance. That is the status quo inside of the site. The status quo is not for the Israeli armed forces to enter the mosque and guard groups of hundreds of illegal extremist religious settlers to walk through the courtyards and dance provocatively and make a political statement, essentially. And these movements, known as the Temple Mount movements, receive a lot of funding from charitable organizations in the United States, in Canada, in the UK. And again, their goal is specifically to destroy Al-Aqsa Mosque. So it's not about prayer. And the Israelis will argue that Jews should have the right to pray at Al-Aqsa Mosque. There is a split opinion, actually, when it comes to Jewish scholars, right, and rabbis, and what they think should be the norm for Jewish people, whether they should enter it at all or whether they are allowed to enter it. And there is a divergence of opinion there in the Jewish religion. But this is not an issue of who can pray where. When you attach a political aim like destroying the mosque and building a synagogue in its place, then it becomes problematic. And that's what these movements are doing. That's why their incursions into Al-Aqsa are so incredibly provocative. And that's why the Israeli government backing these organizations and the Israeli occupation police forces escorting them and protecting them and expelling Muslim worshippers during Ramadan and all times as well, so that these settlers can go in and that these groups can make these provocative statements, is so incredibly provocative in of itself. This is not about maintaining a status quo. This is about quite literally stealing Al-Aqsa Mosque and turning it into a synagogue. Or the first stage is changing the status quo so it's not just a Muslim holy site anymore, and allowing then for the process of complete Israeli sovereignty over the site, which has the prospect of causing a region-wide religious conflict, a religious war. And Israel is heading full speed towards that. That's why this is so provocative. So when it comes to the 8th point there, it just summarizes what they've already said, which is Palestinians are all to blame, Israeli forces did no wrong, and I want to end with this point because they're basically just repeating themselves. This video could have literally been 15 seconds instead of over a minute, and it could have summarized its point in literally one line, basically. And it could just be Israel can never do any wrong at any time, and Palestinians are all terrorists and anything they do is wrong. And that's basically what the video is. But I'll just add this because it's a very important point. Israel claims that it has to go in because Palestinians barricade themselves in the mosque. They claim that it's legitimate to be doing what they're doing, and that because they had fireworks, oh no, not fireworks, that injured nobody, hurt no Israeli forces. They don't actually have to go in and storm the compound because it's completely fine and safe for the Israeli settlers to enter when the Muslim worshippers are there inside the mosque. It just is. And we saw that after there was the exchange of fire from Lebanon and Israel. The Israelis hit soft targets in Lebanon, Syria, and Gaza after rocket fire from all three. We saw that Israel backed off a bit, right? And it knew that if it went any further, if it escalated things further, perhaps it would be in a regional war. And it doesn't exactly want that without at least preparing for that scenario. So what the Israeli forces decided to do, it was decided that they wouldn't storm Al-Aqsa and they wouldn't expel the worshippers. So there were hundreds of worshippers who were there in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound overnight. They closed the doors of the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and absolutely nothing happened. And the settlers came in the morning, and nothing happened. There were no injuries, there were no clashes, there were no fireworks, there was nothing because the Israeli forces didn't attack the worshippers. They didn't attack anyone and they didn't expel them. And the reason why that happened is because the Palestinian resistance movements based in Gaza and elsewhere responded with violence, and Israel saw that it's not worth it to continue to attack the Palestinian worshippers in Al-Aqsa Mosque. So essentially what happened is Israel proved that it only understands the language of violence, and that violence is the only thing that will stop it from committing its own violence and its escalatory measures. And its whole point about it needed to go in there to secure the site and to, make it safe for non-Muslim visitors, was because, that's the whole thing that it needed to do that. It's all wrong because it literally happened when these same people were stationed there, called by the same movements to do the exact same thing. The only difference in the scenario over the weekend, for instance, was that the Israeli forces didn't attack them, and then there was no incident, and things ended peacefully. So that's the video completely broken down, and hopefully by now you will have a better understanding of what actually happened in Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. I'm Robert Inlakesh for The Last American Vagabond, and thank you for listening.
Next, let's go to this clip from Derrick Broze with an update on the Fluoride trial.
All right. What's up, everybody? This is Derrick Broze, The Conscious Resistance. Today is Thursday, and I'm here live. I'm on the road still, not at my desk, and I don't have my microphone with me, so I hope this is coming through okay. Let me know on the audio if it's sounding all right, and if so, we will continue. First, I'll remind you guys that my website is theconsciousresistance.com, theconsciousresistance.com. Guys, this is where I've been broadcasting my content for going on 13 years now, producing documentaries, writing books, video reports like this one, interviews, podcasts, all kinds of interesting and solutions-focused content exploring spirituality, both mental, physical, and spiritual. So I encourage you to check us out at theconsciousresistance.com. And today I'm going to be covering my most recent article for The Last American Vagabond, which is focused on the ongoing fluoride story. And if those of you who've been following my work, you know that this is something I've been keeping up with now for, I want to say, 4 or 5 years. This lawsuit from the Fluoride Action Network, originally starting in 2016. And thank you on the sound. Thank you, Jeremy. The lawsuit started in 2016 with the Fluoride Action Network and Food and Water Watch and other organizations suing the EPA after they filed a petition under the new law called the Toxic Substance Control Act, which allows citizens to petition the government to say, we believe substance X, Y, and Z may be toxic to health, and we think it should be reviewed. So the Fluoride Action Network did that with fluoride, which is put in the water here in the United States. Hydrofluorosilicic acid, a byproduct of pesticides, phosphate mining, aluminum mining. And the petition was denied, and so they've sued the government. And now it's been going on since 2016. Here we are in 2023. The actual hearings in this lawsuit turned into a trial in summer 2020, and I covered that extensively, as I'll go over in just a moment. And basically it was put on hold for a few years, and in the last couple months we're slowly getting, let me go ahead and open up my previous tab here. We're slowly getting more details on what's been going on behind the scenes. And the latest developments, which just happened this Tuesday, is that now the second phase of the fluoride trial has been set for 2024. But before we dive further into all of that, again, guys, my website, theconsciousresistance.com. This is where you can find all of my content, download my books for free, watch our movies for free. And I really want to say, guys, if you do want to support us, I encourage you to go to theconsciousresistance.com/invest. I've just recently launched a new monthly support through Buy Me a Coffee, not Patreon. So if you want to support me outside of Patreon, I don't use that anymore. You can support me on this Buy Me a Coffee, where you can also send support to my P.O. box I have there. But as you can see here, just like Patreon, set up for $3 a month, $10 a month, whatever you want. And you can continue to support so that we can do these types of reports. Now, as I mentioned, this is my author page on The Last American Vagabond. For those who don't know, I write at thelastamericanvagabond.com. And you can go here to the team. You see my name, Derrick Broze. You can see some of my series of articles, including Fluoride Trial. You click this, and it takes you here to every article I've written over the last 4 years, 3 or 4 years. It's 2, maybe 3 pages of articles and interviews related to this. So if this is all new to you, go get caught up. I'm not going to rehash everything today. But we're going over my latest article, and this will, again, is linked at theconsciousresistance.com under our latest post, Fluoride Lawsuit to Resume in January 2024. Because that's the latest information, guys. As I said, it's been going on for 7+ years, and now it is going to resume January 29th, 2024. So if you thought it was taking long already, it's going to take even longer now. The hearings were in 2020 for a couple of months, then they got put on hold in the fall of 2020. It's been 2.5 years now, and then we have some recent movement, but no new actual phase of the trial. And now the judge and the EPA and the lawyer, Michael Connett with the Fluoride Action Network, agreed to a timeline of January 2024, January 29th. So starting at the end of January, they said that they expect the trial to run for 1 to 2 weeks. So that'll be into basically early February 2024. And then you would assume shortly after that, the judge will make his ruling, unless something else happens that delays this even further, as it has already been dragged on. But that's the latest bit of information. So for those of you who just trying to get what's the latest in the fluoride lawsuit, fluoride trial, I get this question periodically. Again, you can always just go to my website and search on our water fluoridation category, or you can go to Last American Vagabond, check out my recent articles on that. Now, the rest of this video is going to get a little deeper into the background for those of you who care and want to get the background. And I actually think this is the most important part. If you just wanted to know what's going on with the trial, when it happens again, January 29th, 2024, it's basically on hold now to then. There will be some procedural things taking place, and I might write about them as things develop over the next however many months that is, now 10 months away. So, but beyond that, there are some really interesting details that people need to know, and that I wish, and I just hope more people out there in the independent media will reach out to me to do interviews about this, or just do your own reporting, because there's so many little nuggets of powerful information that the public needs to know, and I'm doing my best to put it out there, and I thank you everybody who supports that. So the previous video I did on this topic, we were talking about, let's go back here to our water fluoridation category on the website. You scroll down. Oh, I don't have it listed there. Let's just search water fluoridation. And I did a report a couple of weeks ago about how the National Toxicology Program, which is this government agency that has been doing a review of the studies on fluoride for several years now. And here you can see, this is all my reporting I've done on fluoride. This isn't the one I'm looking for, though. So this government agency, the National Toxicology Program, they have been doing research on the alleged toxicity of fluoride, specifically looking at, is it a neurotoxin? I can't find this report. Is it a neurotoxin? And they've said in their own words, here's their words from their May 2022 report, which was suppressed, as I'm going to outline in a moment. It was suppressed. The reason you've never seen this report or heard of this report is because behind the scenes, while the scientists said it was ready for release, officials at the Department of Health and Human Services and the CDC blocked the release of it. And that's what you need to know, is that government agencies, bureaucrats are blocking the release of science that shows, here's the data, quote, higher fluoride exposure is consistently associated with lower IQ in children. And I will say this, based on the emails and the documents we have that have been released, we know that the scientists didn't think it was necessary to include that word higher, but the reviewers from the government kind of strong-armed them and made them add that word higher, so it says higher fluoride exposure. It's kind of like a caveat. So it's not like not regular fluoride exposure, but in the debates, and this is something I've reported in one of my previous articles, in the debates behind the scenes between the scientists and the reviewers, which is actually an unprecedented kind of window into that world of the peer review process. So it's actually really interesting. And again, go back and read my last couple articles. You'll understand more what I'm talking about. But the scientists themselves, they keep telling the reviewers, we don't need to add the word higher. We don't need to add these little caveats you're trying to make us add, because they rightly recognize that it's not just, for one, like a person who's drinking or cooking with tap water that's fluoridated, that's only one exposure. They're also being exposed to it through their shower. They're being exposed to fluoride in processed foods. They're being exposed to it in canned goods that use, usually they're packaged with water, and that typically, unless specifically a company says, that's specifically typically packaged with fluoridated water, fluorides in pharmaceuticals, and on and on and on, right? So yes, the study, and the scientists also said that the studies they looked at, because they did a review of like 500 studies, narrowed it down to the 20 best ones that were least biased and highest quality, and they said that, in their own words, in these debates with the reviewers who are trying to get them to change their words of this NTP report that found that fluoride lowers IQ in children, the scientists within the National Toxicology Program, a government-funded, taxpayer-funded agency, said that they stand by their work because the public is being exposed to fluoride in a number of different areas, and that some of the studies they looked at were above the levels, the government recommended levels. But they also said that some of the studies they looked at were at the levels the government recommends and below that the level the government recommends, and still found problems with water fluoridation, meaning that your child's IQ, their brain, their neurodevelopment is threatened every time that they're exposed to this, or if they're in utero and you're a pregnant mom and you're drinking fluoridated water, and then your baby's born and you're using the fluoridated formula and then reconstituting it with fluoridated water, they're getting triple exposed to this stuff. So you really need to think about this. And there was another report that came out recently after the government was forced to release this on their website through this lawsuit. It's a July 2022 meta-analysis titled Association Between Fluoride Exposure and Children's Intelligence, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. And the scientists behind this said, quote, this meta-analysis confirms the results of previous meta-analyses and extends them by including newer, more precise studies with individual level exposure measures. The consistency of the data supports an inverse association between fluoride exposure and children's IQ. So I say all that to say that the science is clear, guys. The science is clear. We've had science before this, but this trial, this is why it's historic. This is why I'm lamenting that there's not more people reporting on it, because it should be one of the biggest stories going in mainstream media and independent media. We have evidence that another conspiracy is true. You ever been called crazy for talking about fluoride? I'm sure some of you have. I know that in my activism over the years, and especially as a journalist, you talk about things like this, and people, they look at you like you're nuts. You know, I go to, for example, I'll go to political events to try to confront previous mayors or political officials about why they're supporting water fluoridation, and they kind of just look at me like I'm an idiot and laugh in my face. They're sort of like, oh God, one of these fluoride people, right? And it's just so frustrating because the data is on our side, much like it is with vaccines and other things. So let's get a little more into the details. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and this is why the title of this video is titled Fluoride Lawsuit to Resume in January 2024, plus new cover-up details, question mark. And the reason I say question mark is because I can't prove that there's a cover-up going on. I don't have I can't get inside the minds of these people, but there are some interesting things going on here, and I think we can draw at least we can make some informed conclusions, let's say, or at least remain skeptical. So on Tuesday's hearing, this just happened a couple of days ago, the Fluoride Action Network attorney Michael Connett, he told the federal judge in San Francisco, Judge Edward Chin, that these documents that we just went over, the NTP documents, the meta-analysis that came out through this lawsuit, he said now that we have these documents, he thinks the court has sufficient data to make a decision on the toxicity of fluoride. And the reason he's saying this is because back in 2020, when this trial was first going on, and then the judge put it on hold, the judge was pretty much like, well, there's going to be more studies coming out soon, and I don't want to make a decision without seeing everything. So let's wait. And as we see now, it's been 2 years, and those studies never came out because now we know behind the scenes, the government was working to cover up these studies, right? And to cover up this report. They didn't want you to see this data, and they wish that you weren't hearing about it. So Michael Connett's saying, look, we got the data now. You have enough to make a decision. But he also said over the coming months, he's going to want to, they have depositions where they depose people. You get called in as a witness on a trial, and they'll do like a videotaped or audio recorded interview with you, kind of cross-examination that they can use for evidence and as part of the trial. So Michael Connett, attorney with Fluoride Action Network, he told Judge Chin that he, quote, intends to examine some of the facts around the Department of Health and Human Services decision not to release the NTP documents. That's the National Toxicology Program, the documents that I just mentioned that, again, we now know because of emails that came out through this court case that the government was trying to prevent this study from being released, and that the scientists behind it said many times that they believed that it was ready for public release, and it was the government that intervened. And it's been reviewed more than any other report that's ever come out of the National Toxicology Program ever. And they're still asking for more reviews because they don't want the public to see this. So, and again, when Michael Connett says we need to examine the facts to see why HHS decided not to release these documents, that's related to those emails. Now, those emails, as I've reported numerous times, and I'll mention here, those emails specifically state that Assistant Secretary of Health, Rachel Levine, which is the transgender person at the Department of Health and Human Services, that this email dated June 3rd from a Nicole Johnson, Associate Director Policy for Policy Partnerships and Strategic Communication in the CDC's Oral Health Division, contacted a Jennifer Grieser, a Senior Public Health Policy and Analyst in CDC's Washington office. So two different people from different areas of the CDC write each other on June 3rd, 2022 in these emails that we now have. And she says, quote, the latest we heard yesterday is that ASH, that's Assistant Secretary of Health, Levine, has put the report on hold until further notice. Right there. I mean, so Michael Connett can imagine he's going to want to depose one of those ladies or both of them in that email to say, can you tell us more about what you meant in this email? So he told the judge that he's like, I'm going to depose more witnesses so that we can understand why the HHS instructed the NTP not to release the monograph. The monograph's another name for the review that they were doing. He also said he plans to depose someone from the CDC, from the Office of Secretary of Health, as well as NTP Director Richard Wojcik. And Wojcik himself, this other scientist in the NTP, the director, after these emails came out saying that it was his boss, Rachel Levine, that blocked this, he filed a document with the court, a declaration saying, no, it was me. I was actually the one behind it. You know, don't be mad at my boss. It was me. Sort of like he got pushed to, to take the blame, basically. His boss was probably like, hey, I can't be dealing with this fallout. This is just me speculating. And maybe somebody came and said, hey, Wojcik, we need you to take the fall for this. So he files the declaration with the court saying, hey, I'm the one who blocked the release of this NTP monograph. But either way, Michael Connett wants to depose him for court so we can ask him, why did you, choose not to release this document, even though the scientists have been reviewed numerous times and said it was ready for public release. And Michael Connett said that his ultimate goal is, quote, to understand why that report, which was considered complete and final by NTP scientists, was not allowed to be published. Now, this is where it gets interesting. And this is, again, why I'm saying, is there a cover-up going on? Because Judge Edward Chin, throughout this last 3 or 4 years of this lawsuit and this trial, I believe that he's been doing a fairly good job of trying to remain independent and impartial, right? Because if you want to judge, you don't want somebody that's just going to be swayed by the latest trending topic. You want them to stick to the law, right? As far as we know it. And this is not a defense of judges. I'm just saying, if you, in the truest sense of what a judge is supposed to be, an impartial person, you wouldn't want somebody who's easily swayed, right? So that can be a good characteristic. However, in this case, there's clear evidence that there is a cover-up going on and that these scientists, as these emails say, wanted their report to come out to the public, and their bosses blocked the release of it at least a couple times in September 2022 and again in May 2022. We know that this report was blocked from coming out. And now we have the draft version, but it's not official government, policy. According to the US government, fluoridation is still a good thing. That's why we need to find out why this report didn't come out. And hopefully at the end of this trial next February, the judge rules in favor of finding fluoride is a toxin and it is removed from the water once and for all. But in the meantime, Judge Chin, as I wrote here, whenever Michael Connett was saying, hey, I want to depose these scientists and try to find out why this wasn't published, the judge was noticeably annoyed. And I'm saying this in my personal opinion. Like, he clearly was like, oh, why are you going to do that? So what he said was, whenever Michael Connett was saying, well, I need to find out why the NTP scientists, their comments about it being ready for release, why those were ignored and why it was blocked from being released. Because, and I think this is right, Michael Connett said, I imagine when we come back to court, the EPA is going to argue, well, those are just draft reports. We shouldn't pay attention to them, right? Because they were never released, even though, again, the scientists say they were good and they were ready. So Michael Connett saying, I need to go question these officials so I can understand what was their motivation, so I know how to, answer that argument that I assume the government's going to make. And the judge said, quote, whether there is a goodwill or ill will, isn't it enough that we have the documents? Seeming to say that it doesn't matter if the dentist industry or the pesticide industry, the aluminum industry, and the various players who benefit from putting fluoride in the water, it doesn't matter if them or government officials block the release of this. We have it. We have the documents now, so who cares? Let's not look back. And again, maybe that's, the judge is not supposed to get political and just be objective, but if this story isn't told in these court cases, and if the scientists choose to not speak out, then this story is going to be buried, and we will never get the truth. And yes, there are concerns. The government, I'm sure the government is scared. Various agencies in the government, including groups like the American Dental Association, the U.S. government, EPA, CDC, FDA, and others who continue to say that fluoride is one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. Those people, and probably every single dentist who has recommended fluoride to his patients, could potentially open themselves up to class action lawsuits when parents realize maybe my kid became dumber because of all that fluoride I was feeding them. And realistically, I mean, it sounds silly, but there will be lawsuits, and I think that's why they're fighting so hard. Obviously, they don't want to admit they're wrong or that they've been lying. But then the other thing is, when Michael Connett said, he brought it up and he's like, look, I need to be able to argue, I need to be able to depose these scientists so we can find out how much weight to give the May 2022 draft assessment. And then this is where it gets spicy, because the judge was clearly like, back off, bro. At least that's my position. This is what Michael Connett said to the judge. He said, it is our position that this is the report the court has been waiting on for 2 years, and the only reason it wasn't released is because of political pressure. He told the judge that we need to understand why they made this decision not to publish this report, so that the judge knows how much weight to give the report. And then after that, the judge said, look, to me, the science is more important than whether politicians got involved to try to squash the report. So the judge was just like, look, he didn't totally say you can't depose people, but he said, like, he just wasn't really interested in hearing about that. And I think that's going to be interesting when we come back in February to see how he acts, because I know Michael Connett, based on his amazing work he's done so far in this trial, the attorney for the Fluoride Action Network, that he is going to try to bring in these scientists and put them in the hot seat and question them and put it on the record. And I know that's what he's trying to do, is put this information on the record so the public has access to it. And then people like myself can report on it and talk about it and get it out to a wider audience. And the judge seems uninterested in that information being put on the public record. He's kind of just saying, who cares? Let's not look over there. Let's not pay attention if there was, any kind of interference. Let's just look forward. Now, the next thing that's going to happen in this ongoing saga, the trial, as I mentioned, is going to resume in second phase of the trial, January 29th, 2024. But in the meantime, this NTP report, which again, we have the draft version, but we don't know what the final version is going to look like. Well, the next step in this unusual, unprecedented process that has never happened to any other report coming out of the NTP, never had to be reviewed by so many different bodies and organizations. This random bureaucracy called the Board of Scientific Counselors, they chose to form a working group within this specifically to deal with this. So the working group is the latest body to review the NTP monograph, and they're going to be having a meeting in just a couple of weeks on May 4th. It's going to be a public meeting that I believe will be streamed online. And then from there, they're going to make a recommendation to Dr. Richard Wojcik, who again is the director of the NTP, the man who said that it was his responsibility, that he was responsible for blocking the release of the May 2022 draft report. So that you're putting literally the man who said he blocked the report back in charge of whatever comes next. So I don't have high hopes if this report's ever going to come out. But the point is, now that we have the drafts, now Michael Connett and the Fluoride Action Network and the plaintiffs in this case against the EPA can use those data to argue and to prove once and for all that fluoride is harming people. We already know that, but to prove it in a court of law and to make it where, basically if this happens, the federal government would have to ban it. And every single city who's spending money, like Houston spends $5 million, $1 million a year to put this poison in the water, every single city would end that. And all that money, those millions of dollars that's being paid to different companies like Mosaic Co. in Florida would disappear. And they would all of a sudden have to figure out what to do with their toxic waste. So there is so many people pushing back against this, from industry, government scientists, and I don't know why, we can't get in their heads, but that it's clear there is a cover-up going on. There is an effort to block this information from going to the public. And the judge, maybe he is impartial, but maybe he has other intentions. I'm becoming less and less hopeful that he is actually going to do what's right. And when it comes back to trial in February, because he seems like he's not going to want to hear any of the so-called conspiracies of political interference when it's clearly relevant. Because, we can say, let's just talk about the science. But if the science that's being presented to you from the government was all contingent on government intervening and preventing other science from coming to the surface, then clearly the political interference does matter. I hope that makes sense. Like if somebody's intervening when the scientists say, hey, our report is done, we did our homework, it's been reviewed a dozen times, we're ready for it to be released. They even said by May 18, 2022, they wanted it out, and it was never released. It was never allowed to be released. Then it was reviewed again. Then September 2022, they had another draft. That was never released. Here we are in April 2023, now with a court case set for February 2024, and this information is still not known to the masses. I said this on an interview I did earlier today. If we were to go out to the street right now and do man on the street interviews, everybody, wherever you live, whether you're in the United States or elsewhere, and you were to ask just a kind of random sampling of, let's say, 10 people, what do you think about putting fluoride in the water? Or what do you think about the idea that fluoride is dangerous for you? You would probably get people who are like, oh man, that's conspiracy talk, right? I mean, fluoride's great. My dentist puts it in my mouth. People are so uneducated on this topic, and it's by design. And coincidentally, fluoride also affects your pineal gland. There's people who believe this is part of the spiritual attack. And now we literally know all those so-called conspiracy theorists who said they're trying to dumb you down with fluoride. Well, guess what? It does affect your IQ, especially at a young age, as children, as babies in your mom's womb. And we should assume it continues to affect you throughout adulthood. So please, guys, help get this report out. If you've enjoyed this, you can go back to theconsciousresistance.com, check out the front page, and you can see this post. Fluoride lawsuit to resume in January 2024, new cover-up details. You can find that article that I was just covering there as well. Please send that to your friends and family, not just because I want you to share my work, but because we now have to wait till February for the next step in this fight. And that means that between then and now, there are going to be families that continue to drink fluoridated water. I posted on social media the other day, I stopped my mom just a couple days ago. I'm here visiting family. from washing her strawberries and her cooking her oatmeal with sink water. And, you know, even me, somebody who's been investigating this for over a decade and who's reporting on this trial right now, my family doesn't hear or read or see all my work. So I had to say, hey, Mom, look, let me tell you why you don't want this. I'm literally working on a trial right now showing that this can affect your IQ and your thyroid and your bones and kidneys and livers and all this. So please spread the information so we can protect more people, as many people as possible. And hopefully in the next year, this crap is finally taken out of the water. And in the meantime, avoid drinking out of the sink, cooking out of the sink, processed foods, pharmaceuticals. What else is there? Processed foods. Oh, the canned goods. Like I mentioned earlier, the water in there is more than likely fluoridated. Get a filter in there if you on the sink if you can. Get a shower filter if you can. If you can't afford that yet, save up some money. Skip drinking for a few weekends and you can afford it. It's not that expensive. But in the meantime, go buy you some BPA-free or glass jugs and start filling up at the local water filling stations that usually do 5 to 7 different types of filtration. You're looking for reverse osmosis to get the fluoride out, but you also need to remineralize it because RO takes out so much of the minerals as well as the toxins. Solutions are there. Don't be passive. Don't be apathetic. Find a solution. Spread the word, guys. And again, if you want to support me, theconsciousresistance.com/invest. You can go here, check out my P.O. box, support me at Buy Me a Coffee, and I will continue to do this work, guys. I greatly appreciate your support. It means the world to me. I'm going to continue to broadcast until they take me off the air. So thank you, guys. See you soon. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.
Since 2012.
Last but not least is this clip from the Kim Iversen show and her interview with Ryan Cristián on the Dioxins in Ohio.
Well, residents in East Palestine reportedly have had to sign agreements waiving their legal rights regarding the train derailment. Now, why would they need to do this? Well, maybe because there's toxic chemicals that could be poisonous to them. With us now is someone who's been covering this quite a bit, Ryan Cristián from Last American Vagabond. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
So what is the latest with the chemicals that these people in East Palestine are having to deal with? The government, of course, is saying nothing to see here, everything's fine, but what's the truth?
Yeah, it's quite an incredible situation where we've now had 3 different independent testing. You know, one was done by an individual of his own accord, but there was one actually done by Texas A&M, and all of these independent testings have found, at the very least, levels of dioxins and numerous other things above safe levels. And that's the exact opposite of what we're hearing from the EPA, literally arguing as of the last time I looked that there's no problem. Our testing says it's fine, directly contradicting what these independent people are finding. On top of that, you have the example of pretty much, a ubiquitous symptoms across the community, nausea, nosebleeds, all sorts of different things that they're all there's a ubiquitous issue that they're all claiming. All of that's consistent with what is arguably the problem, whether it's vinyl chloride or these different chemicals. Then you've got the example of the CDC who recently went there, and it was at the beginning of March, first week of March, 7 of 15 of them went there, got sick with the exact same symptoms. And they still argue maybe it was fatigue. It's just kind of ridiculous how this is going. And to your first point, it's important to include that there was a beginning example, only one of which I've seen confirmed, but it did actually happen, where the company that was hired by Norfolk Southern was going around having people sign documents to get funding funds for what they've been through. And there was a local news report that showed they signed saying they were basically arguing or signing that they would not hold them accountable for any future problems. It's just kind of staggering. But as far as I can tell right now, the problem is very real. People are getting sick right now. There's animals dying in very distant, miles and miles outside the area they say they're supposed to be a problem. And my biggest concern is that what we're beginning to discover is that there's a background problem of both dioxins, which we can get into if you want about what that is and where it comes from, but as well as PFAS, or what we know as forever chemicals. And what's interesting is they're now finding out that these things have been a problem for decades, well above safe levels. And now we're talking about the situation where the EPA seems to be dragging its feet to not test for either of these things, despite knowing there's a problem there.
So what are dioxins?
Well, the simple idea is it's not like typically chlorinated products that are burned have a byproduct of dioxins, and there's a whole range of dioxins. The worst and pretty much considered the most dangerous compound that we're aware of, which is TCDD. That's the highest level of dioxin. That's what we're dealing with here. Vinyl chloride burned has that byproduct. They know this. It's a common discussed issue. Now, for those that know the way this went down, they dumped the vinyl chloride, all 5 containers, which the argument was made that was unnecessary, and burned it. And that caused, and they call it a controlled burn, but all the experts on the ground have said, well, the fact that you can see all the smoke, that's proof that it wasn't controlled. Controlled means the controlled flow of oxygen for the most part. So it had a lot of byproduct, a lot of carbon, which is guaranteed that caused dioxin byproduct. Now, the problem with dioxins is you can look back, specifically TCDD, CNN reports from 20 years ago that talk about how this is something that can travel thousands of miles. In a lot of cases, pretty much never goes away. It bioaccumulates in the fat of both humans and animals. And my point in the background level problem is that they've known this has been a problem in these exact kind of areas. So my biggest concern is, and this is something I saw, the Dark Horse podcast made a good argument about this, that it's possible, or we should consider the fact that these corporations are well aware of how to play this game. And we've seen this in past environmental disasters where they can make one of two choices. They can either deal with the problem and do their best to contain it, and then pretty much maximize what they'll have to deal with, paying out lawsuits and so on. Or they could arguably try to spread out the problem as far as possible so it blends in with the background issue. So it's harder to understand where they're accountable. Legally speaking, it becomes very hard to prove. Whether that's happening, that's for everybody out there to decide. But the issue is that they're still not testing for dioxins. And the issue, they know that they're there. Independent testing has already found them. And my biggest concern is they're already, and have been since the beginning, shipping waste, both liquid and solid, across state lines, when you can prove they still have not tested for what they know is in there. And so that's spreading the problem, guaranteed.
So who are these independent testers then who are going there and testing? Who's bringing them in?
One that I've been trying to keep in touch with is Scott C. Smith, who he's a very well-known expert, and he does it of his own accord. One of the earliest ones that went was somebody, I'm blanking on his name off the top of my head, but he was somebody who was involved with a lot of these large environmental disasters in the past, and he's somebody that's usually hired by outside parties to do exactly that. But the one that I think is most important, that'll have the most clout, was Texas A&M. They went there independently and did their own testing, and it's literally the opposite of what the EPA is saying. They found high levels of chemicals, or to be specific, levels above safe levels for multiple chemicals. And now one of the things I forgot to mention is, as of about less than a week ago, one of the residents just got tested positive for vinyl chloride in her urine. And that's really concerning because vinyl chloride's different. We're talking about something that boils very low temperature. So the moment it came out in contact with the air, it was bubbling and boiling over. And so it'll vapor and evaporate reasonably quickly, but that's why when you put it on the ground, it was a problem because it would contaminate the groundwater. But for that to be in her urine this week, I mean, that speaks to a problem that we know is an issue. That's not just the fact that they're saying that it's not a problem with their testing. I don't know if that's just that they're choosing not to see the issue or they're being misled by something else. I don't know, but we can prove there's a problem right now.
So I'm wondering if the EPA, similar to the FDA, is a bought-off organization, that this is a regulatory body. They're supposed to keep the American people safe. But ultimately, with the FDA, what we know is that they get a lot of the funding from the very companies that they're supposed to be regulating. So it's very difficult to do when they're the ones who are actually funding you. Is the EPA operating similarly? What would be the motivation for the EPA to not do this thorough testing, or to just say, no, there's nothing to see here, don't worry about it, even though you've got this vinyl chloride in your urine?
It's a good question. And I can't know for sure, but my opinion would be that, and this is what I was getting at with the background level. If you look at the way it's being reported, the media is arguing that they're saying that it's not dangerous. But what they're actually saying is, well, the level of dioxins we're finding is not any more or less than the already background level. That's not the same as saying that it's not dangerous. My thought would be that we're stumbling into a problem that they've been aware of for decades. I mean, you can see, if you just do a quick search online, you'll find a lot of new conversation as of the last couple of weeks of people going, hey, this thing called PFAS, it's everywhere and super dangerous. Why haven't we talked about it? And I don't understand why suddenly we focus on it, or the media focuses on it. My concern is that what happened here opened the door to the reality that dioxins have been a problem for decades. And maybe they don't know what to deal with it, how to deal with it. That's the other part of the conversation, is they're shipping this stuff to places that I can prove, is not capable of dealing with PFAS or dioxins. Incineration I've talked to experts from Clean Harbors, which is the primary group they're using, in 2 different locations on the record. And they say, 1, that those places don't have incinerators, and 2, that that's the only way they're able to deal with them. And it's also company policy. So yet they're shipping them to places that buried in the ground. So this is a problem that we can prove is something that they're aware of, and for some reason don't want average people to get kind of hip to. And I think that's because I honestly don't think they really know how to deal with this. The argument from many experts is that specifically PFAS and dioxins can't even be dealt with. That's why they're called forever chemicals. There's dispute there that you can incinerate them at high levels, but I hear the opposite from plenty of experts that say in their entire careers, they all they can do at best is remove a portion of it, and then even the ash that gets burned off is still a problem. So I think they know this stuff.
So then who's responsible for this, and what should they do? With the train derailment, was it actually Norfolk Southern's responsibility or was that something the government, a regulation with those train tracks? I mean, who's ultimately responsible for this disaster, for these chemicals? And if these chemicals were already there and they've known about this for a long time and they're just like, oh, I don't know what to do about it. We've just got contaminated soil and contaminated groundwater or whatever. How would they even go about fixing this, or who would be responsible?
Yeah, well, that's a lot in there. I mean, I think that the idea that I want to be clear that I'm not saying that there's not a problem that was caused by the train derailment. That I think it was exponentially increased. I think they're just trying to run from that background problem. But to who's at fault? I mean, there's a lot of background here. We could talk about the Trump administration and the altering of regulations, or that's a conversation, but that was a while ago. I think it's far more relevant to point out that Biden's administration just recently basically quelled a protest from the actual rail workers, and in one of the points in that was about safety. And so right after this, you find this happening, and it was the core point was 2 people on this miles-long train, and you find out that the evidence showed that the level of the temperature on the wheel was higher than it should have been, but it was below the level they arbitrarily set as dangerous. So it's like they knew there was a problem, but it kept going. So Norfolk Southern's at fault, but at the same time, government regulation or the lack therein is part of that problem. So it's, can you really fault the corporation for operating within a broken system that they're allowed to? I personally do. I think they're accountable, but you can see how that game is played. But the follow-up, let's be clear about this. The EPA, one, as I pointed out, is well aware of all of this problem. Like immediately they knew what was going on. Biden, as well as the EPA from the state, said they were there within hours, both federal and local. That means they were involved with the decision, the catastrophically ridiculous decision that every expert's pointed out now in retrospect of dumping it on the ground with no barrier, lighting it on fire. It exponentially increased the problem, which again, to that point, was maybe the idea to spread this out as far as possible. I don't know, but the EPA is at fault here. Like Norfolk Southern is a company that is going to try to do its best to not get in trouble, to remove accountability. Right. The EPA didn't do anything until weeks later. I mean, I should say anything, but in my opinion, in regard to demanding that the testing be done or rather do it themselves, that didn't happen until trucks were already moving, shipments were being sent. I mean, if that's not incompetence, it's criminal.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if when Trump did reverse the brake, what was it that he reversed the rule? It was a train brake mandate. I wonder if that would have even applied to this train, because usually it takes so many years for these rules to even be in effect. They say, well, you have to have these new brakes by XYZ time, and him reversing it, how much that actually had to do with this particular derailment. I think it's easy to point the finger at Trump. A lot of people want to do that for a variety of things, but it's like one of those questions that who is really truly responsible for this? Was it him? Was it Obama? Does it go back further than that? Should have this been these brake rules set up even before Obama's time? It's kind of unclear. But I think a big question is that EPA question. Why are they not doing their job? I mean, as you mentioned, Norfolk Southern, of course, as a big corporation, is going to do everything it can to absolve itself from any sort of liability. That's their job. That's their lawyer's job for their company. They're going to go and say, what can we do to save the company and to ensure we don't get shut down or bogged down in lawsuits that are going to collapse us completely, or just at least take a ton of the money away? So you can expect that from them. But the question is the regulators. It's just like the FDA. These regulators, the expectation is they are for the people. That is who they're supposed to be for. So I think a deeper look at the responsibility. I don't know. And this could have been one of those accidents that sometimes accidents happen and there's nothing that really could have been done other than rebuilding the entire rail lines and beefing up American infrastructure. Who knows? That might have been the only answer, and we just allowed our infrastructure to crumble for so long that these types of accidents are now happening. And they happen all the time. Train derailments are happening all the time. And so we're not really having a conversation about how to fix that. But The EPA, it seems, it is 100% their responsibility. And look at how they've failed the people in Flint, Michigan. I mean, they just fail people time and time again. And I think there's a big question there of why are they so inept? And what have they done that's actually worked and been good for anything? I mean, it's a good question that we now ask the FDA since the pandemic. More of us have been aware of that. But I think, what's great about you covering this so in depth on your show and through your site is that people do need to be paying attention to these other regulatory bodies that are supposed to be for the people, but where are they and are they really? That's a big question.
I agree. I'm glad you bring up. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm glad you bring up Flint, Michigan. I think that's an interesting point that overlaps exactly with what we're talking about. Again, my opinion would be the reason that Flint was never truly dealt with is because it's not just Flint, Michigan. You can prove that half this country has problems with the water, including with lead. And so I think that's kind of the same argument. It's with what we're talking about here, you can prove that they're aware of this problem. There's a really interesting study about an Arctic Inuit community that has the highest level of dioxins in basically there's 500 kilometers in any direction. There's no dioxin production of any kind, but you can prove that it's because of the United States and how the wind carries it all the way up to the Arctic. And you can prove that they have dioxins in their breast milk because of it. And yet we're disputing a couple miles, saying that we don't know if it went mile 4 or 5 miles. They know this is a problem. And so there's a game being played here. That's what I believe.
Well, and the fact that they burned the, what was it? What was the chemical? The vinyl chloride?
Vinyl
is that
chloride.
what it was? Yeah, the fact that they burned it and it went into the air, it didn't just affect the people in East Palestine. Right. That then, where did that wind blow? How far did that air go? That's it could be going all the way. Who knows? If it's going all the way to the Arctic, it could be going all the way to the West Coast for all we know, depending on where the wind blows, where the wind takes. It could be going all the way to some other continent. What a mess this is, and I think it does raise a larger question about. Just about these chemicals in general. If they know that there's this problem with lead in the water, and they say, well, what are we going to do about it? There's lead all over the place. Yeah, Flint, Michigan's just one of many. And, oh, yeah, dioxins, this is just one area of many that these are all over the place. And they're not notifying us of this so that people could at least have some awareness, some knowledge to maybe even make some change about it, to demand some sort of change. Yeah, that's... Instead, they just shrug their shoulders, it seems like, and says, oh, well, this is just the way it is. There's nothing you can do about it. What a mess. Well, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us and giving us some insight on this. Do you want to tell everybody, I was on your show, and so the link, that's been published and that's out there. So where can people find, we had a great conversation earlier today that lasted about an hour. So that was a really great time. Where can people find that show and all of your other great work?
Thank you. On the lastamericanvagabond.com. It's, thelastamericanvagabond.com. And the show we did today is on all of our platforms for the most part. I often, want to advocate for the alternative platforms, the Odyssey, Sovereign, and so on. But just check the platform, you'll find it. I enjoyed the conversation as well. I thought it was really an interesting, eclectic conversation about a lot of different things, and I enjoyed it. And I wanted to add one more thing, though, before we go about the concept of the land grab part of this. That's a big conversation, and there's a dispute about whether it's one or the other. I find it to be kind of both in the same, but I just argue that, whether or not it was by accident or, different theories around this, there is a big conversation being had right now about the land and whether or not these people are going to lose their land, whether through, buying it out at cheap because of the problem or so on. And I think that's an interesting overlap for people to think about with the food infrastructure and where this happened.
Wow, that is definitely interesting. Yeah. Well, The Last American Vagabond, always lots of information. They're always very detailed information, lots of research. Really appreciate it. And you always encourage people to do their own research, not just to take your word for it. And I really like that as well. So, Ryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kim. Pleasure to be here.
Thanks for tuning into another episode of the Independent Review. See you next week.